This
communities across
conference
North
will
America
now
and
be
beyond.
recorded.
Great, glad we're being recorded. With renewable energy as well as broader mitigation and resilience work, and one particular area that we work in is equity. So we're very glad to be here with all of you today. Thanks for having us as part of this series with CUSP. So to get us started, in terms of the agenda, we'll briefly cover some context, background, type of concepts, and then really get into what equitable program structure in the building retrofit segment looks like. And then my colleague Jamie will walk us through some nice examples that'll really bring to life some of the concepts that we'll talk about. And of course, we're really looking forward to hearing from Thomas Bartholomew from Washington, D.C., and their Solar for All program. I think that will further extend the discussion of bringing to life some of the concepts that we'll talk about. And then I think the end here is really what we all enjoy most, is getting to hear from one another and hearing what's on your minds, what's resonating, what's not. There will be a couple of points in between that we'll sort of pause and hear how concepts resonate for you. So to get started on the context, background, and overview, the slide, next slide, the slide here outlines some of the key stages in program design. For those of you who might have been on the webinar last week, this is just a refresher. CADMIS, this image here is based on a report that CADMIS supported the Urban Sustainability Directors Network with a couple years ago on equitable program design for cities and their partners, and this just outlines some of the key steps. All we're really intending to focus on here is that we today are really diving deep into the program structure stage, but wanting to highlight that there really is a broader process that this needs to be a part of, that long-term commitment from cities and their partners is critical to serving underserved communities, and that the sort of loop here shows that it really is an iterative process. The next framing piece on the next slide is just, these are in that guidebook that we talked about that is publicly available, I should note. These are 12 principles for design that we really encourage cities and partners to come back to at every stage of equitable program design, whether that's just getting started, executing, following up, and doing tracking progress. These are some really key principles. They're all outlined in the guidebook and come up in different ways throughout each of the steps. So I won't really talk about them here much. We do have a little bit more of the information available on the last webinar. There's just one I'll touch on briefly, which is go beyond carve-outs. So a lot of times, particularly in some of the early weatherization and other types of programs, we sort of saw a lot of carve-outs in terms of serving particularly underserved groups, oftentimes lower income groups. And we just really want to highlight that this guidebook and the webinar today really emphasizes getting beyond those sort of carve-out models in which a certain amount of resources or a certain type of programming is available to just income qualified customers. We're really trying to think more holistically about centering those more underserved customers in your whole program design, and that's a lot more information is available on that in the electric vehicles webinar we did last week through this concept called targeted universalism. And on the next slide, there's a link that you can actually find some of that additional supplemental information on. So wanted to just briefly also tell you what information was covered in that webinar. On the next slide, there's just these 5 components here: refine sustainability and equity goals, consider contextual factors, define program eligibility, recruit program partners, and determine program administrator. This is what's covered in that last week's webinar. If you happen to miss it and wanted to check it out, that's all available to you. And we'll pick up here today with revisiting the determined program administrator shortly. Great. So getting into the program structure, we can go on to the next slide. I think Abhi wanted to do a quick poll here before we dive in. So Abhi, I'll let you chime in.
Thank you. So again, if you go on menti.com, menti.com, type in the code 324754, and then rank in the near term, in the next, through the context of this LEAP project, what do you, where exactly are your priorities lying? And we ask this because this will help us help support you better based on where your priorities are and what you're looking to do. So go to Menti.com and use the code 324754 here on top of my screen. I'll wait for a couple of minutes. That'll help guide the rest of this presentation and also with the resources that we will develop to help support you on your work. Thank you.
Great. And Abhi, does it take longer, or should I dive back in? Oh, it looks like a few more coming through.
A couple more minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we get maybe 4 or 5 people. We have 3 people now, and we can go from there.
Sure.
Any last takers for this? Okay, moving on. So looks like mapping out customer interaction is on top of folks' minds, and then followed by consumer protection, program admin, and then supply chain stuff. So I'll hand it back to you.
Great.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, no, good to know. And that's similar to what CUSP and Abhi and Allison have suspected, so we'll try to emphasize those parts of the webinar even more. We did want to start by defining what we're talking about when we say deep retrofits. People can think of a lot of different things when you hear the word retrofits, right? It can be energy efficiency, renewable energy, resilience, a lot of different sort of meanings. We wanted to briefly walk through some of the key areas and really let you know where we're kind of focusing on today. So some of the key areas included range from starting with weatherization. These are sort of lighter touch, sealing off windows, doors, that type of thing, moving into energy efficiency, what we'll call here, right? So deeper retrofits, actual replacements of appliances or structures, and then technologies like air source heat pumps or solar, on-site solar installations, either solar PV, solar thermal, et cetera. We are essentially emphasizing most of those outside of weatherization, but did want to provide the framing that it is important when we think about retrofits to start with what we can consider lower hanging fruit, some of those weatherization and energy efficiency, as well as sort of a more comprehensive approach that might kind of pick and choose multiple of the items that we just talked about. But again, really focusing on these deeper decarbonization and fuel switching approaches that will help cities like those in CUSP really meet their sustainability and clean energy goals. What you see to the right is an image from FCM that is just a way that sort of articulates some of these differences between the energy efficiency and conservation side, really reducing energy consumption in sort of that darker blue bubble from reducing carbon intensity of energy sources. So some of those technologies are on the right bubble. So this is just a way that one major Canadian player sort of characterized the market, and we just wanted to provide that as reference. Also in the appendix of this slide deck, which will be available to you online, there's a couple more images that are from FCM that outline, for example, one is a map from low to high of carbon intensity grids, and also another is the proportion of greenhouse gas emissions by end use. So those will be available to you following the webinar as well. Next slide. Thanks. So last framing piece here is really on co-benefits. You all, I think, are pretty familiar with all of these as key co-benefits to building retrofits programs, so I don't need to walk through all of them. Did want to highlight a couple of things though, right? So when we think about lowering energy bills and decreasing operational costs, one of the things to think about is that there's not always, right? Not every technology that we talked about would have sort of lower net costs in the near term. So really thinking about what it means for serving underserved communities and thinking about some of that near and long-term cost change and how to support communities in that way. Additionally, we wanted to really emphasize the improved health, safety, and comfort type of one. When you think about benefits such as changing from burning gas inside the home, right, from heating, that can actually be pretty hazardous around carbon monoxide or other types of issues. And so thinking about the transition to clean energy as actually really providing a lot of public health benefits too, or having that potential. So those are a couple of things to highlight here. So the key components we'll really focus on today on the next slide are determining program administrator, map out customer interaction, build equity into the supply chain, and establish consumer protection measures. So to start with the program administrator slide, again, some of this program administrator piece was touched on in the last webinar, so we'll go through it a bit more quickly, but did want to provide the refresher that there's a key step, right? When you, as a city, are starting, as many of you might already be or have done in the past, are thinking about starting a clean energy program that is equitable and thinking about what should our role be as the city and who should administer this program. So some of the key things to think about are outlined on the next couple of slides here, but we have in the boxes at the bottom some of the key roles that the government, a city government could play, even if they're not the administrator, right? So is that around outreach, facilitating local partnerships, really reaching those target audiences, or is it around leveraging supply chain and maybe existing contracting relationships or other types of purchasing relationships that you might have? And then finally, what access do you have to other inputs and data that can really ensure that equity is core to the program? You might be able to integrate with other sorts of programs on the government side, of course, managing confidentiality and things like that, but the government may be in a unique position to offer some of that supplemental support. So just really want to think about those types of things. On the next slide, really sort of highlights again what the key questions are to ask oneself in determining an administrator. The first is really what's needed from a building retrofit program administrator. Is it, again, selecting installers? Is it community outreach, logistics? And based on that answer, is the municipal government positioned well to be that administrator? And then secondly, centering equity, right? So what does it mean for the local government or another player to really be able to drive decision-making about equity, right? Are there, you can ask yourself as the government, or if you're considering having another administrator, you can ask the partner directly through an RFP sort of selection process, what are your policies around diversity and inclusion? What are your policies around workforce training? What are your policies around how to conduct outreach in underserved communities? These are things that can be directly asked of yourself and of potential partners. So thinking about those sorts of questions is pretty key to determining the administrator. Next, when we go to mapping out the customer interaction process, this slide sort of highlights some of a few key themes. One is making it easy, the next is minimizing burden, and the third is integrating with support services. So what this means, really, we're thinking about making it easy, right? So ensuring that there's clear steps and resources provided. And you look at minimizing burden, this really means thinking about limiting financial burdens first, right? So offering free or minimal cost share for audits or site visits, providing incentives where possible, and then considering other burdens besides finances, because we often think about finances, but think about time, right? Can you collect all the information you need from a customer at once? Really limiting that sort of back and forth. Can you integrate with other support services where people are already going? You know, maybe it's considering where your target customers already interact on food and housing program sides or low-income energy assistance program types of offerings, right? Or even considering are there avenues at your utilities that may be relevant points of contact. Again, really thinking about where do your target population groups already go and how can you integrate there so that there's sort of a single, ideally already trusted point of contact. A couple of points we wanted to share here, examples from New York City. One is more general and one is more targeted. So the general one around customer interaction is New York City has a 311 system, which essentially allows any resident to call with a question on any non-emergency service and just get a clear answer about what the service is and how to access it. The other one that's a bit more tailored to the retrofit topic is that New York City has a retrofit accelerator, and that addresses energy efficiency, renewable energy, water heating, a number of different areas. And it provides one-on-one, really kind of close hand-holding support to customers, really walking them through, how do I find a financier? How do I find a contractor? What's the paperwork I need to fill out? And so while that program is not as targeted towards individuals, renters actually tend to benefit, and that is, renters do tend to be an underserved segment, but by supporting building owners through that process, renters also actually receive some of the benefits of clean energy. Just wanted to share just briefly some of those examples, and we'll hear a lot more about examples from my colleague Jamie at the end. Turning to the next slide, we have a series of sort of steps here that we really wanted to think about. These are all of the different components of customer interaction. I won't really talk about them in depth, but just wanted to give you a flavor that these are the different key places that you can pause and ask yourself some of the questions that we've been talking about, right? Who's using the program in terms of utilization, and how are they engaging in the process? And then how is that engagement different for underserved populations, and more specifically for different segments of underserved populations, right? So how are things different for the elderly versus for people of color versus for low income versus for renters, right? Just thinking through that different segmentation so that you can concentrate resources in ways that support the ultimate residents and customers that you want to support. So if we go to the next slide, there's a whole series of questions here on this slide and the next that I won't necessarily walk through in any sort of detail, but these are the types of questions, again, since this was an area of interest to all of you, that I will sort of say all these questions are here. And actually, I'll say, before I even get into the questions, I did want to point out that this idea of mapping out the customer interaction process is something that we're seeing examples of in cities that we work with around the country and in other places, both in the US and Canada. So one example is Boulder, Colorado. They've created journey mapping and are in the process of continuing to do that for their heat pump program customers, to really understand from an equity perspective what is motivating people to pursue clean energy. What are their specific challenges, right? Are they sort of proactively doing replacement versus did something break? And then how does that sort of change their decision process? Where do they go once they encounter that situation? Who do they talk to? What are the hurdles they overcome? You know, what paperwork are they filling out, et cetera? So cities are sort of thinking through this, and these are the types of questions on these next sorts of slides that that you can ask yourself, right? So what is the technology and how's it being utilized? How's that different in different sort of underserved populations, and how does that vary based on the type of audience you have? In terms of the engagement, what other support services are being used, and how can you tie your service into those? And really, what's the program administrator, again, coming back to that question, what's the administrator's capacity to guide customers through the process? And then finally, we talked about this, but the implications for the underserved populations, what degree of investment is really required to really support them the way that is needed? So whether that be financial or time, and further honing in upon what are the most burdensome components, so that, again, you can really concentrate your resources in that way. On the next slide is just a couple more. Yes.
If I could jump in
here.
Yeah, please. I just wanted to add that the questions that we're kind of proposing here, where Abby and the Cadmus team are going to put together a resource package that will that I will use to follow up with Leap City, so that we could do a sort of one-on-one on really getting into the weeds on some of these. So for now, this is just an overview, but the resource will have some of these so that we can get really into thinking some of these things through. Is that?
Absolutely, yeah. Super glad you mentioned that. Yes, this is not the only place that these questions will be. They'll be compiled in the resource, as Abby mentioned. A couple more components here that I think we touched on, right? Thinking about the different segmentations within the underserved market, right? Not sort of grouping all underserved markets together, but actually thinking specifically about how different groups are different can allow you to be much more effective in concentrating your resources. And when we say concentrating resources, it's not just all about concentrating, again, financial dollars or other types of costly measures, but even just tailoring what already exists, right? So it could be something like ensuring that the right languages are available, or that the time of day that a service is offered or a program is offered matches the schedules of the people that you're trying to reach. So turning to the next slide, I will actually, we wanted to take a quick pause here before I get to the next couple of components and just ask, are there key examples that you're seeing, either in your city, peer cities, or elsewhere, that you would like to share with the group here in just a quick pause?
I'm going to read out a comment that was posted out. Robin Webb says, we did a journey mapping and other ethnographic research to inform program design of the Change Homes for Climate at the City of Edmonton, and this work was supported by Natural Resources of Canada.
Awesome. It's great to see journey mapping at work.
If you have any other thoughts, welcome to chime in on the call, or you can post a comment like Robin did. Okay, seeing none, moving on. And if you have any thoughts on this as well, you're not able to chime in right now, send them out to an email to me or to the LEAP group of the CUSP network email thread, and then we can pick that up and put that in our notes. Thanks.
Great. So to keep going into the other couple of topics that we have here, thinking about building equity into the supply chain, and I'll go a bit more quickly through this one. It seems like that's less of an area of focus for this group, but did want to mention that there's a number of areas that you can see benefits in the supply chain, right? Whether that's generally local job training and skill building in the community versus economic development, and thinking about at a higher level, right, where these opportunities are situated. Are they through school partnerships? Are there minority-owned businesses? Are there other types of hiring and apprenticeship commitments that you might be able to integrate with? Really thinking about community building as a key area, because knowing that a lot of cities really do want to create jobs, but are also trying to think about that balance between not just total jobs that are maybe bringing in new people, but thinking about the communities that are already there and making their skills, continuing to invest in their skills. One thing to mention is that we do see some cities targeting free trainings for women or minority-owned businesses to procure government contracts, or to really any women or minority-owned business that's able to kind of hone in on a key area or training gap and provide that. We're seeing some cities really thinking about that closely. To turn to the next slide, this is again just at a high level some of the same types of questions, right? Thinking about in your supply chain, are there just being intentional about first just thinking about it and then considering whether you can work it into any kind of procurement options. I know that they can sometimes be limited in Canada and also in other places, but thinking about, are there local, at least, businesses or women or people of color or Indigenous owned businesses that can perform some of the required design or installation services, and thinking about, are there ways that that can be encouraged, if, you know, maybe not required, but maybe encouraged in types of procurement. Moving on towards workforce development, noting that this was an area of a bit more interest. Here's some of the key questions, right, that cities are asking themselves, and some of you on the call might already be asking yourself around workforce development for equitable clean energy building or retrofit design. Are there trades that are going to require retraining, right? So not just thinking about, oh, we're going to create new jobs because we're doing a solar program or we're doing some sort of air source heat pump technology, but as over time those technologies begin to grow and displace other parts of the market, how is that affecting who has jobs? So where are there retraining opportunities? Who is most vulnerable during this sort of technological change? And how do you think about sort of the proportions of underrepresented groups and how they're represented in this shift? So with that, did want to actually say that there are some cities that we are working with who are actually wrestling with these questions, right? So they are thinking about, do we train people who currently install furnaces or do we retrain new people? And are kind of going through a full process to look at, okay, to sort of analyze if we want to reach a certain level of decarbonization by 80 by 50, kind of say 80 by 50, say that's the goal. How many jobs will that create and in which areas? And then that can kind of help you understand the baseline trajectory to make decisions about procurement rules or encouragement in procurement that could minimally disrupt and ideally maximally support target populations. So again, each city's context is different, but that's some of the type of stuff that you can think about. Turning to consumer protection, on the next slide, again, as we think about these retrofit opportunities, really thinking about, okay, as we're reaching underserved populations, how can we ensure that they're most protected from, the somewhat real risks involved in any sort of contracting decision, any sort of decision to make an upgrade in one's home or a place of work, et cetera. So thinking about how can you guard against predatory practices or cost escalators? How can you incorporate performance guarantees and monitoring to ensure that savings from energy efficiency or other types of renewables are actually seen, and that there's protections in place if those benefits don't come to fruition. So there's a number of things that we'll talk about here. Some of them can be as simple as, we talked about the first couple, but some of them can be as simple as customer-friendly resources or forming partnerships in the right places. And we'll talk about these a bit more as we go through. So on the next slide, we did want to highlight that actually consumer communications really is an important part of consumer protections. It's ensuring that underserved populations, one, have the information that they need to make the best decisions for themselves, and two, that they have the support that they need as they go through the program enrollment, implementation, and servicing thereafter. So you might partner with some sorts of trade or standards associations or regulatory bodies, but really you might also partner with community organizations and outreach organizations. So thinking about who you can partner with there to ensure that the right information is actually getting to customers. Who's engaged, who's trusted, can materials be available in multiple languages, and what are the most effective modes of communication? One thing we'll highlight here around the multiple languages is actually that in many cases, not always, but in many cases for families where there's, say, parents who are non-native English or French speakers, they might always frequently rely on children to be their personal translator. And so that being coupled with the fact that kids can sometimes be more pro-environmental influencers in their homes make the ideal sort of messaging be that which is very family-oriented and family-friendly. So something that can be understood by someone of a lower age can actually ensure that a parent who maybe doesn't speak English or French is able to really digest the information. And so that's just something that we don't always think about, but can be actually important. Turning to the next slide on safeguards and oversight, thinking about what role the government can play in safeguards, right? So sometimes I think, at least in some of our experience, we can see that governments want to play this role, but don't always know the best places to start. But there's actually several avenues. One can be just centralizing information in general about the program to the point that we just discussed previously, but it can also be about, and we'll talk about an example shortly when we get to the next section, but in programs like Solarize or similar programs, can actually use your role as a government to somewhat vet high quality installers or other types of contractors to protect against predatory practices, right? And then that will kind of allow all residents participating to know and sort of feel a little bit of trust in the process. The next is sort of around making sure that in a program design that there is an out, that if savings are not manifesting or the program is just generally not going the direction that they want, that participants are able to find a way out. And that can also look like protecting the participant and maybe the city, depending on the program structure, through recruiting a sort of financing partner who's willing to hold a loan loss position or something like that. And then finally, we don't want to overly focus on tracking in this webinar, but review and oversight is a key piece in protecting customers, not just in the current program, but also thinking about if you're piloting a program, really having strong review and oversight so that you're learning from the pilot, and not just having a pilot for the sake of the pilot, can actually ensure that those learnings around serving underserved customers are being brought forward into the following repetitions of a potential program. So for that, I think we'll take a very quick pause here, I think, and hear about any examples that you might want to share right now on these couple of topics that we just touched on, consumer protection or supply chain, before we get into the more detailed discussion on examples. So quick pause here for any thoughts on programs that you're aware of.
Or I had a question. This is Avi, can you elaborate or can you share some examples from your work with cities in the United States about what is the need for consumer protection and what has quote unquote gone wrong in some particular instances of base programming and such that has brought consumer protection to the forefront of cities' efforts here. If there are no other questions,
Yeah.
elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So one of the things that we see is if there's, I guess, sort of one is not high quality contractors, and two is just sort of, even if it is a quality contractor, sort of variability in kind of just understanding technology risk as it might apply in a very specific place. So if having done some case studies recently, if a small business or an individual that is particularly in an underserved market is taking out a loan to pursue, say, a solar upgrade on the premise that they're going to be receiving a certain amount of utility bill credits or receiving a certain amount of savings over time, right, as a related point, and those savings don't manifest for whatever reason, that can be, depending on how the specifics were structured, that can be very disruptive to that person. And what we see is that there's really a variability in who that harms the most. And it tends to be, right, the people who are able to sort of understand those risks better tend to have more resources. The people that tend to not understand those risks as well or not be able to prepare for contingency planning tend to be people that have fewer resources, and recognizing that the reason that there is that discrepancy is not anything to do with those people necessarily, so much as to do with the fact that that sort of protection measure and risk evaluation discussion is not always built directly into the program, but is the sort of supplemental information that some people have easier access to than others. So how can you sort of level the playing field and make sure that that type of discussion and consideration is really baked into a program is one of the types of topics that we're thinking about.
Yeah, and it seems like some of the consequences of predatory lending and stuff may disproportionately come bear upon families and households that lack the resources to take action against something like that, right? So it's consistent with the approach that we have taken in the guidebook with the sort of targeted universalism and stuff. So cool.
Exactly.
All right. Moving on.
Great. So with that, I'll pass over to my colleague Jamie Dodon to take us through some program examples. And again, hopefully this will really bring to life a lot of the concepts that we were just talking about. So over to you, Jamie.
Great. Thanks, Farah. Nice to meet you all. I'm Jamie Dodon. I'm a senior analyst at Cadmus. And as Farah mentioned, I'll be walking through some examples that help illustrate the different program design elements that Farah was just discussing. So if you see here on the following slide, we have an overview of some of the examples here we go. We have an overview of the examples that we're going to be walking through. You can see there are 4 examples there on the left-hand side. Heat Smart, Cool Smart Somerville, Clean Energy Works Portland, California's Low-Income Weatherization Program, which is a little misleading because it actually expands beyond weatherization, and then a Catalyst 2020 program, which is a really awesome program that has a different angle, but it's based in Canada. Some of you may be familiar with it already. So this chart just sort of illustrates the different elements of the program, equitable program design aspects that Farah was walking through. So we'll just dive in here and I'll talk through these different programs and then we can pause at the end and happy to answer questions about the programs. I know some of them we've worked on in detail, and some of them we've sort of completed case studies on, so happy to answer questions and talk about these programs further. So starting in on the next slide, talking about Heat Smart, Cool Smart Somerville. So this is a program that's a community group purchasing campaign, which is, for those of you familiar, it's similar to the Solarize model that they do for solar, where you get a large number of community members within a given area to sort of sign on to install air source heat pumps in this case. And that helps, that sort of collective aggregated demand helps lower the cost of installation, and also sort of by providing contractors with sort of a large base demand that they can target. So this was a program that had a lot of outreach built into it. In terms of the program administration, it was a partnership between three different agencies within Somerville, which was really important because it enabled the city to leverage different capabilities within its administration. So the different offices were the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development, the Housing Division, and then the Department of Sustainability and Environment. So these different entities could kind of leverage different skill sets. The Housing Division particularly had a grant from HUD that they could bring to bear on the program. So that was particularly valuable for both dividing up the work and then leveraging different resources from the city agencies. And then in order to sort of supplement the administrator capacity, there also had trained volunteer coaches, which would help the program administrator sort of augment outreach and capacity to play a more hands-on role with some of the community members that were engaged through the program. On the next slide, covering sort of the customer interaction piece, the program is designed to help community members and customers sort of access the resources of the program really seamlessly and as readily as possible. So there were multiple ways they do this. One was meet the installer events, which were in community groups, so at local churches or event centers or other places that were really accessible to community members so that they could easily show up to learn more about what an air source heat pump is, how it could provide value to their home and reduce their operational costs for heating and cooling. And also these outreach events had coordination with local community groups. So sort of groups, whether it's a senior housing group or other nonprofits working within the area, there were partnerships that were formed with those groups to sort of access the leaders and community groups that community members were already engaging with to sort of facilitate entry into the program. And then the second piece, which Farah had mentioned earlier, is just the financial burden. So how do you minimize the financial burden, and particularly the sort of upfront cost of engaging with these types of programs? Air source heat pumps in particular have a high upfront cost. And through the HUD grant that I mentioned earlier, the program was able to offer 0% interest loan for up to $25,000 for 7 years. So this really enabled participants within the program to access the resources and sort of lower the financial burden. And this was an income qualified threshold that different program participants had to meet. So they had to go through a sort of a separate approval to get approved for this type of loan that was offered. But it really enabled low to moderate income customers to engage much more seamlessly and readily within the program. Then the final piece I wanted to highlight with this program is the consumer protection. And in this case, air source heat pumps are a relatively new market, and not all the contractors have sort of the best practices for installing them. So there was a really robust installer selection process that went into this program. Since there are only a few installers that service the program, they submitted a RFP to get interest from installers within the region, went through sort of a first round of review there, and then also did in-depth interviews with the contractors to sort of assess which would be best able to both install the technology well, but also sort of engage with customers, talk them through sort of the details of the technology and how an air source heat pump would provide value for them. And this vetting and selection process ensured that the contractors that were ultimately selected for the program delivered really high quality installations for the consumers. So regardless of sort of your socioeconomic status or whatever, you were getting really high quality installations by contractors who knew what they were doing and had been vetted. So this was, very successful program, had some interesting elements that helped sort of attract and sort of cater to some of the low-income populations and frontline communities that were within Somerville. So moving to the next slide, the next program I want to talk through is the Clean Energy Works Portland. So this is a program in Portland, Oregon. Did whole home energy upgrades, which included both weatherization and air source heat pump installations. And this one is interesting for several reasons, as we'll get into. It's particularly interesting in terms of the way that they tried to incorporate equity within the supply chain. But starting with customer interaction, similar to the Somerville program, they had energy advocates with technical expertise. So these advocates, which were sort of similar to the volunteer coaches in Somerville, could really talk homeowners through their sort of what technologies were right for them, what weatherization packages, whether an air source heat pump would make economic sense for their building. And this just helps people to understand, this stuff can be complicated, as we all probably know. So being able to understand what the benefits and trade-offs are of the different technologies is really valuable, and having someone to walk you through that process that you trust and that has been given to you by the program and by the city is definitely a valuable aspect that can reduce the burden of customer engagement and interaction in terms of time invested. And then similarly, again, to Somerville, there was a reduced financial burden. So the financing package that they offered wasn't as sort of robust as what Somerville was able to offer, but they did do reduced loans ranging from 4 to 6% over 20-year periods for those that needed them. And this just helps, again, defray that upfront cost and enable more participants of different socioeconomic statuses to engage with the program. On the next slide, we're getting into the supply chain tactics that they used, as well as the supply chain and consumer protection pieces are pretty linked for this program. But they set a community workforce agreement, which was an agreement that was built with stakeholders within the related to the program, and it set a target of 30% of the project hours being performed by employees from historically underrepresented groups, and 80% of the hours performed by local contractors. So this wasn't a legally binding target, but it was set out in this community workforce agreement and sort of signed on to by various stakeholders within the program. And they dedicated a resource to sort of making sure that this happened. So it's kind of an interesting piece that I don't think that they thought that there was legal concerns about making it sort of a explicit legally binding agreement, but they sort of, by getting buy-in from the different stakeholders, they were able to really set it as the threshold they were aiming for within the project, and then allocate resources to help achieve that threshold. And in order to achieve that threshold, they had a sort of three-legged stool of incentives, supports, and requirements. So on the incentive side, they sort of offered preferential sort of placement in programs to contractor groups that were meeting meeting that target in terms of the project hours and the local contractor hours. So sort of having them more preferentially placed within the programs and offered more opportunities for them to engage with projects. They also offered supports to contractors that didn't have sort of some of the requirements that were needed for the project. So they had, if you flip to the next slide, they had a Building Performance Institute certification, which helped address consumer protection as well to ensure that contractors were well trained. But they ensured that there was money and support for contractors that didn't already have that certification to receive it through the program. And so they offered sort of technical assistance and incentives to help them gain access to the certification as they sort of moved through the program and tried to gain access to the program. And then, yeah, the other piece of that requirement is that by requiring that they have this Building Performance Institute certification, you're ensuring that you're getting high quality contractors who can give sort of quality technology installation to the people who are engaging with the program. And yeah, so the really interesting part about this Clean Energy Works program is their approach to the supply chain. So definitely happy to sort of explore that more if there are questions about that. But it's sort of a benchmark, and using this community workforce agreement to get buy-in for that and direct resources towards achieving that is definitely a unique approach that was valuable for this program. Then moving to the third program is the California Low-Income Weatherization Program. As I already mentioned, this expands beyond weatherization. It includes energy efficiency, electrification, air source heat pumps, and solar services. And they have a single family version of this, but we're going to be talking about the multifamily building program that they have, which is really focused on engaging building owners to implement these improvements. So in terms of the program administration, they have an organization called Association of Energy Affordability, which is the single point of contact for all the upgrades via the program. So they're responsible for contractor procurement, on-site property assessments, and coordination of incentives and financing. And this is really valuable in terms of a program administration approach, especially when you're offering different services through the program, that there's sort of a one-stop shop that can help facilitate and be the point person for all the different upgrades offered. This helps with the customer journey and interaction, that you're not sort of passing people off to different groups in order to sort of talk about energy efficiency versus air source heat pumps versus solar. So they aggregated this all into one organization. And on the next slide, in terms of the customer interaction, again, AEA was providing technical assistance throughout the process to the property owners. So they worked very closely with the property owners in helping them sort of understand what the specific packages were that were most valuable for their buildings, and how they could deliver those packages and install those as well. And then the second piece is just minimizing the financial investment. The incentives through the program covered 30 to 100% of energy efficiency upgrades and 50 to 100% of solar installations. So significantly offset the upfront costs for building owners and developers, made it more cost effective for them, and made them much more likely to install the technologies in their buildings. And then finally, this program had a sort of somewhat similar approach to Clean Energy Works Portland on supply chain, though not as sort of explicit in terms of the specific goals that they were aiming for, but they had preferential treatment for contractors that were working with, that were hiring within disadvantaged communities. And so they would sort of have preferred listing in sort of program brochures. They'd be up higher on the list, making it more likely that those contractors would receive selection by people who are engaging with the program. And then they also had a requirement they sort of linked their program with a job training program that already existed for solar PV, and required that customers or people who are engaging within the program and contractors, that if they were doing solar, they would have to hire from that job training program. And this was a sort of valuable way of supporting an existing program and also ensuring that the program that they're working on had high quality contractors who are trained for completing the installations. Then the final program that we want to talk about today is this 2020 Catalyst program. And again, this is a little bit of a different angle. It's something that is done in Canada. Instead of being a program that's run by sort of a city or government targeting customers, this is actually a capacity building program. So it's focused on developing clean energy capacity within First Nations, Métis, and Inuits in Canada, and really building out that capacity for those people to then go and implement projects, programs, policies in their sort of local communities that they are sort of trained to do. So this program annually trains around 20 catalysts with a variety of skill sets. So they do 4 in-person week-long workshops, learning a variety of different skills, project management, policy related, clean energy finance, other skills that are related to this field. And it really emphasizes a mentor-based training method. So the people who are training in these programs are Indigenous community leaders who have sort of completed projects in their communities, who know the field really well and can sort of understand in nuance the types of sort of challenges and dynamics that the Catalyst trainees might be experiencing. And then this Catalyst network just sort of accumulates and builds over years. So it's started in 2016, 20 Catalysts trained annually. So they're up to sort of 80 Catalysts and counting. And that network serves as a resource for sort of everyone who comes through the program and everyone who graduates from the program. And at the time when we had profiled this program in a year or so ago, when we completed the USDN version of the guidebook, there were 165 clean energy Indigenous projects around Canada. So we can only expect that number has grown in the time since then. as these sort of catalysts, and others have sort of spanned out into their communities and started to build projects and programs and policies that support clean energy. So I'll pause there and have a discussion. Happy to talk further about these programs, answer questions as best I am able, and see what you all are thinking about after that run through of some of these programs that we talked about.
Thank you. And as we go into the discussion, I thought we could bring up just a couple of questions to sort of guide the discussion. Seeing that there wasn't a lot of response in the previous questions, I think we can circulate these exact polling back to you later, so we can focus on the discussion for today. And then that way, I just want to make sure that we're addressing what your immediate priorities are. So if you're not able to respond to the poll now, that's okay. But then if you can, we'd love to hear from you. So what is the preferred role of your organization in delivering these equitable retrofits? Are you more of in the facilitation outreach is your preferred role, design, or is it funding, or is it administration? So if you can take just a couple of quick minutes, go on menti.com and use the code 324754 on top. We should see this pop up here. If not, if you just want to share your thoughts via chat or text, or you want to chime in on the call, do let us know. If you were at the Montreal workshop, we did a version of this. I was speaking about equity work broadly. This is specific about building retrofits and thinking about integrating equity into building retrofits. Okay, I will, in the interest of time, I will probably stay for another quick minute as I see people pop these responses in. Any last takers? Just one more. I should go get trained as an auctioneer. Maybe that might help. Okay. Moving on. This is the last Menti question for you today, I promise. The question is missing. So the question was, who is your preferred administrator for the building retrofits? So if you had to choose, if you had to, excuse me, if you had to place them on their potential for impact and also the likelihood of securing their partnership in administering your building energy retrofit program, which of these entities would you prefer? I see a question from the City of Ottawa. Jump right ahead. You should be unmuted, but if not, you can just type out the question here, or I will go in here and unmute you. Yep, go ahead, City of Ottawa.
Oh, great, thanks. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I'm just wondering if I can ask a question to the last speaker about those programs he just presented. Is now a good time?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, I really love the different examples from Portland and Somerville. Thanks for sharing that. Just wondering in particular about the one from Somerville. The idea of bulk community purchasing, was that actually successful in achieving cost reductions? And how was that kind of motivated? Like, was the community encouraged to self-organize and apply, or was sort of the grouping and the clustering organized by the municipality? Just like a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, so in terms of the second question, in terms of how it's organized, that was sort of the purpose of the program, was to build that demand and engage community members. So all of the sort of outreach conducted through the program, the events, they had a sort of program website that had information about heat pumps and the program offerings and sort of flyers that were delivered. Everything was really with the intention of building up demand within the community. So that was sort of the focus of the effort. in the community outreach side, and then the other part of the program was sort of what I was talking about the contractor selection and training. So having a robust process to be like, and we're going to bring you these, we're going to have these, really highly trained installers who are going to give you this technology or install this technology, and you can meet them at these events. So the whole program was really like centered around building up that demand, where it otherwise might not be, sort of people might not be independently organizing or doing that sort of thing. So that was definitely the primary purpose of it. In terms of the discounts, the partnership with the selected installers led to a discount of about 15% off the cost of installation. So it did reduce sort of from a baseline typical cost, it reduced it around 15%. In addition to the financing, offers would be in addition to that. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Interesting to hear that there was so much cost reduction that was able to be achieved. I guess kind of the follow-up to that is like, does the homeowner, if it's assuming we're talking about homeowners here,
Yep.
They still have a significant role to play in terms of finding contractors, getting quotes, comparing quotes, right? That's not all done by the volunteers.
So I think the homeowner, in terms of the way this program works, so they would be, I think there were 2 contractors selected for the program. So I think that they had the option of either just going with one of the contractors or sort of getting quotes from either one or both of them and then selecting between those. I'm not exactly sure, and I can follow up on this if this seems valuable. I'm not exactly sure how they sort of levelize costs between the 2 contractors if they tried to keep that relatively on par. But in terms of the homeowner side, I think the way that the program is set up, it really lowers that burden because you're giving them an option of 2 different contractors who are vetted, trained, going to give high quality installations, and who are also engaging this program and probably offering the technology at a similar price point. And so I think the setup of the program is designed so that you could really go with either contractor and it would be fine. So it's reducing the burden on the homeowner to actually seek out those contractors and really thoroughly vet them. Does that make sense?
True, yeah, okay. Okay, so then they don't really have to do a lot of getting of quotes and estimates. So the RFP that was delivered by Somerville, then it included a certain price range for where the technology would have to be provided, because otherwise you could see them just like if it's just 2 contractors, it's almost there's not a lot of competition, right?
Right.
To drive those costs down.
I hadn't looked at the RFP in detail. I think that it makes it explicit that if you're engaging in the program, the idea is that you're going to be offering a cost reduction. And so they would be sort of validating that as they went through the process. And if you think about it from the contractor side point of view, they have to put in time to sort of respond to that RFP and, get through the selection process. But once they're through that process, they are, have a pool of customers who are interested in getting heat pumps, and they can, have a really easy pathway to installations. So I think there is a value to the contractor, and that's why they're willing to reduce their price, by around 15%, because it's the actual time that they spend on customer acquisition goes way down through engagement with the program.
This is
For
Avi.
sure, yeah.
I want to jump in real quick and say that we're planning on a webinar with a group called Michigan Saves down in, as you might have guessed it, Michigan. And what they have done is developed a model that sort of makes it easy, the customer acquisition process and selecting the contractor process and acquiring the loan process, the 3 steps in the overall cost of administering a program. They've found ways to minimize it by aggregating across scale in the whole province. That's an interesting model that we've kicked around the idea of having them come talk to us in one of the following weeks about that. So some of the questions that have come up today, I think we might find additional answers in that webinar there. So that them and then a few other speakers would be an interesting way to dig deeper into some of these questions that we're having around aggregation and customer acquisition and stuff like that.
Okay, thanks, Abdi. I'll wait for that.
Right on. Any further questions? Farah, did you have anything to add, or should we move on to our fantastic guest speaker?
Yeah, I want to make sure that we have enough time for all of the great content that Thomas has prepared. So yeah, Would love to pivot there if that's okay.
Right on. I'll pass it back to you to introduce Thomas, and we'll go from there.
Oh, sure. Yeah. We're really pleased. I'll keep it very brief. We're really pleased to have Thomas Bartholomew join us from Washington, D.C.'s Solar for All program. I think a lot of the concepts that we talked about today are really exemplified in this program. And I think I'll just leave it at that and pass over to Thomas to jump into it. Thanks so much, Thomas, for joining us. Over to you.
No, thank you guys. Happy to take this opportunity to talk to you guys about our Solar for All program, which we are very proud of. So in this beginning slide, it's really the only slide I have that has pictures, but I think it kind of illustrates sort of the sort of key components of our program. So we, on the left there, you see some of my colleagues. They're on a commercial rooftop in downtown Washington, D.C. And those are solar panels on both the roof and then also on the sort of the wall there, the parapet wall. So they're sort of sort of on the side of the building effectively. And the benefits of those solar panels are going to go to low-income customers elsewhere in DC. Sort of our model, the sort of motto we use, the sort of marketing we use is that solar can be free. Anyone can participate in solar in the district. And so our program allows folks who are sort of income qualified, those who earn below 80% of the area median income can qualify for free solar. And then you see at the right, my colleagues signing up qualified residents in an apartment building in DC. If you want to go to the next slide.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is kind of our mission statement. So our goal is to serve 100,000 low to moderate income families in the district by 2032 with the benefits of solar energy. All of our new participants in the program should expect to receive a 50% savings on their electric bill every year for 15 years. Next slide. And so our program was established in 2016, and we sort of divided the implementation of the program up into phases of 3 years each. So the first phase was what we call the innovation and expansion grant phase. And so during that phase of the program, our program is funded through a fee charged to electric suppliers that operate in the district. DC has kind of an open electric supplier model. So we have one utility that manages the grid, the electric grid, but anybody that sets up as a supplier in the district, that qualifies as a supplier in the district, can provide energy to residents, through that process, and residents have the ability to select their energy supplier. And so all those suppliers pay a fee if they deliver energy that doesn't meet the renewable portfolio standard that was established for the district. So the renewable portfolio standard has a goal of, each year it sort of ratchets up. There's a sort of a greater and greater percentage of energy that has to come from the renewable portfolio standard. And so anytime they don't meet that standard, they have to pay a fee. And so we get money from that, and we use that money to purchase solar energy and turn it over to low-income residents. So in the beginning part, the first phase, we wanted to try out a whole bunch of different benefit models just to see what worked best. And so during that phase, we served 8,600 district residents. Not all of them received 50% off their bill, but they all received in some way benefits from the solar energy. And so we installed about 7 megawatts of solar in the district, and we're developing kind of like a lessons learned, document that sort of talks about all the different things we learned from that. That's still in process. But sort of the key thing was we tried out these different benefit models, and some of those models included, like just directly giving people credits on their electric bill for the solar. Some included for buildings where residents don't actually receive an electric bill, that the building got like a new roof and some other sort of retrofits through the solar grant. And then sometimes like the energy would go and would power a community room in the building. Other benefits include some residents of buildings are going to get like credits for buying groceries, all different kinds of stuff. So we tried out all the different benefit models we could, and the one that we sort of settled on is sort of this bill credits model. And so in 2020, we're deploying another 7 megawatts of capacity to serve over 2,700 residents with credits around $500 annually, which is about 50%, which is about a 50% savings on the average electric bill in the district. And so it's a pretty decent sized savings. And we began working on sort of a co-benefit model. So there's a federal program in the United States called the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. And in the district, it's administered by sort of the same agency I work for, the Department of Energy and Environment. And so we're working with them to sort of try to pair our benefit, our Solar for All benefit, with their benefit, which also helps to reduce energy costs for residents, so that it's sort of giving like a sort of a 1-2 punch, so that residents whose energy costs are a lot of their sort of annual expenses kind of get the biggest savings, and it's sort of done in a coordinated fashion. So next slide, please. So this is some more details about how we've sort of structured the eligibility for the program. So residents, as I said, are eligible for the program if they earn up to 80% of the area median income. That's a threshold that's set by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And you can sort of see that at the right there, that's the threshold. So if there's one person in your household, the threshold is $67,000, and it goes up depending on how many people in your household. So it's quite a range. So there are definitely some folks in here who earn like a pretty decent living who qualify for our program. So residents are sort of, as we say, categorically eligible if they receive heating, electric and heating assistance, SNAP, which is what we call the food stamp program in the U.S. It's assistance for folks to get food if they don't earn a certain amount of money. TANF, which is our welfare program, or they receive a low-income utility discount, or they live in a property that you have to like earn below a certain income to live there. All those people are sort of automatically eligible, and they just have to sign a couple forms stating that they want to be enrolled. And so otherwise, we take care of the sort of the paperwork on that end. They have to be enrolled. They have to pay their own utility bill, and so they are enrolled through their account with a local utility, which is PEPCO. The next slide. And so this slide is just sort of talking about like our customer interaction sort of philosophy. So we're really focused on reducing administrative burdens for folks. And sort of the administrative burden thing has kind of been a big, sort of a big focus of mine in particular. And if anybody's looking to sort of learn more about that, there's a book that sort of talks about the U.S. context with regard to thinking about administrative burdens for government. It's called Administrative Burden Policymaking by Other Means. It's by Pamela Hurd and Daniel P. Moynihan. And it just sort of talks about all the different ways that government can sort of can be more thoughtful about how whatever requirements it imposes on residents, how those can affect how people actually use the system and interact with the system. Because the more sort of hurdles you place into getting someone signed up with the program, the less likely they are to sign up. It's not, rocket science, but it is something we have to be thoughtful about. And so at Wright, we've created this document which talks about like trying to make it as easy as possible for people to understand how to sign up for the program. So we say you can sign up in 4 easy steps. You make sure you're income qualified, you complete the application, you demonstrate you're eligible, and you submit. And so we've created a dedicated outreach team of 3 employees, all of whom have sort of community knowledge and experience. 2 of them are actually from their native residents of the district, and they live in some of the sort of the parts of the city that we're particularly targeting for sign up, the lowest income parts of the city. And we do signups at other government benefit centers where people are already coming to sign up for government benefits to make it easier for them to sign up. Anyone who's enrolling in our low-income heating and energy assistance program is automatically given the option to sign up, and they will be signed up if they want to. And so we also do community education events, and we've been targeting a particular neighborhood in Southeast DC where we've funded a large solar array. It's called the Oxen Run neighborhood. And so we wanted the residents who are having that facility located right in their neighborhood to benefit directly from it. So we've been targeting them particularly for outreach. We have a grantee that helps us with subscription management called Groundswell. They're a sort of a nonprofit organization that works in DC and elsewhere in the United States. They have sort of a mission around expanding access to solar energy. And they're helping us with providing regular communications to program participants. They're creating a benefits dashboard where anybody who signed up for the program can see their benefits and see how much energy they're saving, and and how much they're helping the climate with what they're doing. And they're also helping to interface with the local utility, because the utility is just like any other utility. They have lots of other stuff going on, and so Groundswell helps to keep on top of any sort of customer issues that go on with the utility sort of helping to manage the program. So the next slide.
Thomas, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to try something with me, just in the interest of time. Are you okay if we skipped ahead to key lessons learned, and then we can backtrack a couple of slides from there?
Yep, that's fine.
So much.
That's fine.
Skip ahead just a little bit. Yep.
Yeah, so these are some of our key lessons learned, and I think that they're all kind of around the same topic. So utilizing government service centers, residents are already signing up for other benefits, is really efficient because people are already there to do business, and it's sort of like builds trust, because our program is a new program. By leveraging other government programs and people's understanding of those programs, it sort of helps to build their trust and understanding of what we're doing. It's just like another layer on top of what they're already receiving, as opposed to just some brand new thing that's hard for them to understand. We're building all of our solar within the District of Columbia in our city, and so site access for the solar is always an ongoing issue, and we have to be creative about how we think about fitting it in. I sort of like that picture I had at the beginning, which shows the panels both just on the roof itself and then also on the parapet wall. Think about different ways that you can fit the solar into an urban context. Really helps with making sure you can deliver the benefits to everybody. Having outreach staff that know and understand the community. Like I said, 2 of our residents are sort of native residents of the district, and they often when they're out doing outreach, they'll run to friends, family members. All that helps to sort of build trust and understanding. Partnering with other government agencies. So we've partnered with agencies that already are delivering benefits to sort of our lower income residents. So they help provide sort of a greater understanding of those communities and greater access to sort of the trust that they've already built with them. Yeah.
Thanks, Thomas. I want to pause here for quick and say that what I absolutely love about your presentation is that even though you're speaking in specific of solar as a technology, I think the lessons, you've done a great job of pulling the lessons and making that relatable to any technology, like building efficiencies or retrofits or heat pumps or what have you, like securing site, just utilizing existing services, reducing administrative costs, working with local community members are, I think, broad lessons for all of us up here in Canada for all the programs that we're developing. I want to pause here and just ask the room if there are any questions that Thomas can answer, and then when we have time towards the end, we could probably go back a couple of slides if that's okay with you, Thomas.
That sounds great.
Any questions? Feel free to chime in, and or if you can't, just type them in the chat. So Thomas, while we wait for folks to chime in, I had a question that came up when I was working with some of the cities. Is when you talk about having other government agencies, that build trust with communities you're already serving, do you see a role for other non-government agencies as well, like local partners, community groups, and what has your experience been with that sort of thing?
Yeah, no, I don't mean to just limit it to government agencies. I mean, that was maybe where we got the most bang for our buck, was working with our other agency partners. But really, any trusted community group can be a huge help in setting up any kind of program like this. So we've talked to local church groups, religious organizations. We've talked to all kinds of. We've done presentations. So DC has kind of an interesting model. We have this sort of thing called advisory neighborhood councils, and so they all represent different small parts of the city, different neighborhoods. So we've gone to them, and so that's like a very neighborhood-based thing where residents can come and like ask questions. We've done presentations to organizations that provide services to like housing assistance or food assistance when people sort of go out of work. All those organizations have really helped with, and particularly probably the group that's been the most helpful is folks that provide sort of nonprofits that provide housing. They do nonprofit housing development. All those organizations have really helped us to understand how to work with these folks better, how to do better outreach, what issues are important to them, what are some of the sort of administrative challenges that are involved in setting up this kind of program.
Excellent, thank you. And I have a follow-up question on that. This is something that we experience a lot here in Canadian cities. Is a bit of a chicken and egg problem. Do you, as a city, do you first develop a program and then go engage with your partners and say, here's what we have in mind? Because sometimes when you go first and then ask people, you might open yourself up to a lot of perhaps promises that you may not be able to deliver on. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, no, but balancing promises is always a struggle for government. So I mean, like I said, we did try out this sort of initial model where we sort of tried a whole bunch of different strategies. That was kind of our opening gambit, and I think that was helpful for both building our understanding of the best way to move forward, as well as sort of the community that supports us, their understanding. Because we had a bunch of different organizations that we gave grants to, and they all tried out different strategies. So I think somebody was earlier was talking about sort of like bulk purchasing solar options. So there's an organization in DC, and it's actually in other places in the U.S. too. It's called Solar United Neighbors. They do a lot of solar bulk purchasing at a sort of a community level, and so we gave them a grant, and they tried out a model where they were sort of doing their kind of bulk purchasing model to sort of deliver benefits to a whole bunch of different residents. And so they learned something from that. We learned something from that, giving them that grant. And so it wasn't like we started off with sort of like a one-size-fits-all model. We tried out a whole bunch of different models, and then we've kind of settled on the one we think is the most scalable to serve the most people.
Thanks, Thomas. Any questions for Thomas? I'm going to go back a couple of slides. Thanks for with me on this. So, customer protections, I think, is what you wanted to touch on before.
Yeah. So this consumer protections piece. So the sort of overarching theme is one of equity, and that's the equity thing there is sort of that's from our program's kind of strategic plan. Build capacity for including equity in all of our programs. And so the key to that is really in sort of some of the things I've already talked about, but then also maintaining good records for residents, minimizing the information we collect from them to what is absolutely necessary, following up with residents promptly, focusing on the burdens, and then sort of targeting those who are most vulnerable, because a lot of people get the idea of equity mixed up with equality or being equal. And of course, that's not really the case. Equity is really about fairness, and sort of usually when somebody's sort of underserved, they don't just need like a little bit. They can sometimes need a lot. And so making sure that we're sort of providing what they really need, not just what seems like equal to what somebody else is getting. If you want to go to the next slide. Yeah, and I thought since you guys were talking about workforce development, this is sort of our workforce development program. It's called SolarWorks DC. It's a partnership between my agency and our Department of Employment Services. We do these two 12-week cohorts each year. The program is administered by a sort of a solar installer called Grid Alternatives. The program is open to district residents who are over the age of 18. Participants get this sort of basic training, and they get a certification which is provided by the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners, which is sort of like the gold standard for this kind of work. Folks have moved successfully for this program. Like I said, we have this large solar system going in Oxen Run. It's over 2 megawatts, and a number of the folks working there are graduates of our program. So we're very, very proud of that. And so making sure that, as we're developing a lot of solar, we're also making sure that folks get access to sort of the skills involved in that, and they can participate in the program as well. It's sort of a key part of what we're trying to do. I think was that my last slide?
Thomas, I had a couple of questions that came through on comments. So you mentioned earlier giving grants to sub-partner organizations. What kind of, what amounts are we talking about? How big were these grants? And was this done through like an EOI, or was it an award, or did you have like a public tender for it? What was the process?
Yeah, so we put out a request for proposals. We have my agency has grant making authority. Obviously every place is different, but we have grant making authority. I think we had set aside around like a total of around $10 million. And so the grants were of different sizes. Some were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, some were well over $1 million. And it all just sort of depended on what the the grantee was proposing to do. The size of the energy that they were proposing to sort of release, and what they were proposing to do for residents. So some grantees were were proposing to do over 1 megawatt, and so they got pretty sizable amount of money for that. And some were looking to do much smaller projects, just to a few hundred kilowatts. And then I think in all of the projects, we also had that they were responsible for enrolling subscribers into their community renewable energy facilities. So that's what they were effectively building. So we were giving them money to build community renewable energy facilities, and then also to sign up residents to be enrolled and receive the benefits from those facilities. And so those facilities have to be they have to comply with like the utility standards, and they have to be so-called grid interconnected and meet all those kind of standards. So it's sometimes the grantee would subcontract that work out. So the grantee would be in charge mostly of the sort of the customer piece, and then they would contract out the solar installation piece. So people took a lot of different models to that, and so we ourselves are now kind of taking the role of sort of enrolling subscribers on this for my agency. That's what we do. And then we have there's something called the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, which is kind of a quasi government entity. It's not formally like a part of the district government, but it's sort of founded by the district government. And they're sort of like a separate entity. There's like a private company that sort of runs them, and they receive money from us, and then they contract with solar installers. So they're kind of our contracting entity for solar.
Fantastic. Thank you, Thomas. That was on time. That was amazing. So it's off our time for the webinar. Thomas, I want to thank you a lot for sharing your thoughts and expertise with us. And I know for a fact that a couple of folks on the call now, and some who weren't on the call, would definitely like to pick your brains on that. So I can probably send them your way over email.
Yes, please do. Please do. Yes.
Fantastic. And if anything of interest comes up here, we'll be sure to pass it down to you. And thank you to Farah and Jamie from CADMIS for organizing this. So this is Abhi, and I know our time for webinar today has come to an end. But if some of us want to stay on the call for a couple of quick questions, then maybe we can do that for just a few more minutes. But what I will do is I will follow up with this recorded webinar presentation, notes, and some key information that we have compiled, and I'll send it out to your email. The slides will look much better than today. And I'm sorry to you, Thomas, and because your slides were perfect. Somehow when I threw it up on the system, it looks like this, but when they go out to you, they will look as beautiful and pristine as when Thomas sent them out to us. So thanks again, everyone. If anyone has any few last questions, we can stay on for just a few more minutes. If not, sayonara, I guess, and I'll see you around in a couple of weeks for our next webinar. Okay. Wow, almost everyone is still on the call. So that can only mean, I'm assuming, that we all have a few questions.
It's Allison here. I'm going to sign off. I just want to say thank you so much to Thomas and to Farah and to you, Abby, for a great webinar. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Okay. I think our members are uncharacteristically shy today. So it is, I'm sure there will be questions. And again, Abby, will follow up with our lead project members on specifics that they're working on, and we'll pick up from where we left off today. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Farah. And thank you, Jamie. And have a wonderful week ahead, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, all. Thanks, Abby. Bye.